I want to welcome everyone to the presentation this afternoon, which is Newmarket Through the Eyes of Children. And we deal primarily looking at children in the town from the 1600s up to this year. And the first thing I want to say is we're going to dedicate this program to the memory of Harold Hood, who died last week. Harold wanted no obituary, no services, no mention. However, Harold, you did too much for the town and for the youth. And here is a picture of Harold actually as a chaperone on my class trip in 1964 to the World Trade Center in New York. So we will miss his enthusiasm and his optimism. He was a great asset and past president of the Historical Society, the Hand Tub Society, the Senior Center, you name it, he had a hand in Newmarket community social life for decades. Dealing with colonial Newmarket, children as Indian War victims. And the first reference we have in the history to youth in town is in 1690, while haying, 8 persons were slain and a young unnamed lad was captured at Lamprey River. So this unnamed lad is gone to history, but he's the first child actually mentioned in our written history. A little later, in 1709, Joseph and Andrew, sons of Captain Jeremiah Gilman, were captured by Indians in 1709 and they were taken to Canada. Joseph was burned during an Indian war dance and Andrew was sold to the French in prison, but he obtained favor from the governor, permitted to work for wages. He gained his freedom and he came back to town. There he later went on to serve in the Revolution. And in 1710, an Indian raid ambushed 17 men, killing Colonel Hilton. Then they appeared in the open road and took 3 daughters of Richard Dolph while they were at play. What happened to them, we don't know, to the young girls. This is a photo of the old Doe garrison, which was down off Goddard Neck, down by where Moody Point is, and it's now demolished. This photo was taken in 1937. It had undergone several renovations, but we do have from this building a corner piece, which is over in that cabinet back there. In 1704, Edward Taylor was killed by Indians. His wife Rebecca and a son and a daughter were captured near the Lamprey River and taken to Canada. Later, Mrs. Taylor and her daughter were redeemed and returned to Newmarket. The daughter married Aaron Rollins, and their farmhouse in Garrison was at the northwest corner of the present Riverside Cemetery. 19 years later, there was an Indian raid on the Rollins garrison. In 1723, 18 Abenaki Indians at Lamprey River attacked Aaron Rollins, who was shot through the walls of the house, scalped. The head of his eldest daughter, age 12, was cut off. While attempting to escape from the house with a son and a daughter, his wife, who previously had already been captured by Indians, the daughter of Edward and Rebecca Taylor, was made prisoner yet again. In a few years, she was once more redeemed. Her son was adopted by Indians and lived with them the rest of his life. Her daughter married a Frenchman in Canada, and years later she came with her husband to Newmarket thinking she was going to get money from the land that her father once owned. By that time, all that land and everything had been, of course, disposed of. We don't know how long she stayed here, but she returned to Canada with her husband. And this was all part of the French and Indian wars that were going on, where the French encouraged the Indians for kidnapping, and these women and children, for the most part, were redeemed for money, which fed the French against the English, all prior to the Revolution. Children in wartime. They were used throughout history. The Geneva Convention in 49 said 15 is your minimum age. The UN General Assembly in 2000 declared it's the age of 18. But we all know what's going on with ISIS today and in Nigeria and through parts of Africa, young kids are being taken from their homes and they're boy soldiers. During the Revolution, young boys acted as spies and messengers during the U.S. Revolution. And during the Civil War, boys aged 12 to 18, with their parents' permission, were trained to be powder monkeys in the ships. And that meant they went down in the hold to take the gunpowder up. And because they were small, without killing themselves, they could bring the gunpowder up and use it for the cannon fire. That the men would set off the fires, but they were called powder monkeys. And prior to and during the Revolution, if you were a boy aged 12 and up, you were considered available to carry a musket or a drum, because many of the young kids in the revolutionary parties that went out were drummers or fifes. And here is the Newmarket militia reenactors. This photo was in 1977 of Gary Bernier on the drum and Peter Batistas with the fife. Young men in Newmarket who enlisted in the military under the age of 17, Eugene Bunker, enlisted discharged at Fort Preble, Maine, born in 46. He enlisted at 16. He died at age 22. His two brothers also joined the Navy at age 19, Ferdinand and Lewis. George Murch enlisted at 17. He said he was 17. He was right on the cusp. He kind of fibbed to get in. And he was discharged in New York, born in Newmarket, farmer, fisherman, fireman. He later moved to Boston. Then he and his wife returned to town, lived on Railroad Avenue. He died at age 82, which is quite an age for men at that point. From the wealthier children, this is a photo of Mabel and Maud Mathis. Don't ask me which is Mabel and which is Maud. I have no idea. However, around 1840, Benjamin Mathis built a stone store where the Riverworks restaurant is now, and that stayed for decades in the Mathis family. And Constantine Mathis is their father. He started a grocery store and dry goods there. He had enough money during the Civil War to pay for a substitute to take his place. So the family was well off. They had a large house on Exeter Road where they lived. Mabel and Mathis and Maud both graduated from Newmarket High School, which was unique at that time for young people to graduate, actually go through. They were 2 of 9 in their class of 1896. The same year that they graduated, their father died. They at one point had a dry good and millinery shop in the same store down at Riverworks for the fashionable ladies in town. Then they also had a place that they had gone to in Boston, and there are pictures of them later on in their later teen years decked out in fine millinery work together. They then went on to school. Maud became a nurse, and Mabel became a teacher, and she taught in Newmarket in the schools for quite a few years until she married. At that point, once you married, you were out of the school system. And she married a dentist in Dover. They moved to Newcastle, and she died in '69. Maud moved to Somerville, Mass., lived with her uncle, and she still stayed in private practice until she died, a widow, and then she came back and she's buried at Riverside. This, if you remember from years ago, is our sampler that was found upstairs. There is no notation on the sampler that indicated when it got here, who donated it, but from research we find that if you look at the dates, this is made by Martha Webster Frost, age 7 in 1841. Now Martha was born a year after the marriage of her parents, Captain James and Hannah Buffington Frost of Salem, Mass. And she was named after her Aunt Martha. At age 4, Martha's mother died, and her father sent to live with her Aunt Martha and Uncle John Webster, who was the Newmarket Mill agent, and he lived in the brick house across from the library. John Webster had sufficient money, he was quite wealthy. He also was from the Salem sea captain history, as was his nephew, Martha's stepbrother, George W. Frost, down here where she labeled his initials down here. How long she stayed in Newmarket, we don't know, but in all probability, she went to a boarding school, because that's what young ladies of fashion did back then. And what John Webster did after his son died in a gun accident, his son was in a boarding school in Massachusetts, accidentally killed by a firearm by his friend. He was, that's when he donated, after that he donated the library to the town and sufficient amounts of money to stock it for the children of the town of Newmarket. Martha married a Benjamin Fabens, and this is in Massachusetts. Fabens also was involved in the sea trade. He was a wealthy merchant, and he made a lot of trips and purchased a lot of goods from Ceylon and brought them back to New England. She died 1 month after giving birth to her last son, and she's buried in Salem, Massachusetts. Summer camp for the wealthy on Camp Bayside in Newmarket. Is this all part of the old Kimball farm? And it stems from the old Reverend Kimball and all the Kimballs down on Bay Road. And during the summer, what they would do is they had a boys' camp for moral teachings and outings for boys from well-to-do families, and ambassadorships is what they were looking for. They even translated it into Spanish, and it was sent to embassies throughout Latin America. And they got some boys up here that would come up by ship to Boston, and then trained to Newmarket. They would be picked up by the Squamscott and taken right up the bay to Camp Bayside. And for the rest of us, the less wealthy, colonial New Hampshire apprenticeships was commonplace. In colonial New Hampshire, child labor was an integral part of the agricultural and handicraft economy. Children not only worked on the family farms, but were often hired out to other farmers. And boys customarily began their apprenticeship in a trade between the ages of 10 and 14. This kind of continued right up until the 1930s in town. And here we have a picture of Armand LePage, left in the photo. He was apprenticed at age 16 in 1920 to his uncle Blanchette to learn the bakery trade. And this is a photo taken in 1928 of Blanchette's Bakery on Main Street. Armand was later known as Baker LePage. He was a baker in the U.S. Army during World War II, and at the Exeter Phillips Academy for 30 years, and then at Lakeshore Park in Alton, New Hampshire for 25 years before his death in 1984. This is an autograph that came from a student's album of 1896.
Newmarket is my dwelling place. New Hampshire is my nation. And heaven is my expectation. When I am dead and in my grave, and all my bones are rotten, these few lines will tell my name when I am long forgotten. Jenny May Lowe, Newmarket, New Hampshire.
And this was written in April 30th, 1896, in one of these student autograph books that the kids used to turn around. You used to have one of those?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Unfortunately, Jenny May died a year after this was written. She was 13 years old when she wrote this. She was 14 when she died of a sudden heart attack at her house. I couldn't find anything about Jenny May, anything anywhere, and why she was in Newmarket. There was no name connection until I read her obituary, which was in the Newmarket Advertiser, and then it explained it all. And then backtracking, you find that her grandparents, Sophie Tuttle Langley and John Langley. John Langley died in the Civil War. The year he died, within a few months of his death, his daughter Annie was born. Annie was Jenny Mae's mother. Annie died at age 22 of consumption. And we know from age 16 on, she was in the cotton mills, and she died of consumption. Then Jenny came up to Newmarket and lived with her grandmother. There were tough times back then. Children had been servants and apprentices throughout most of human history. Child labor reached a new extremes during the Industrial Revolution. Long hours and dangerous factory conditions for very little money, used as laborers because they were small and they could get into places in the factories that the adults couldn't. They were easier to manage and control. They were paid less money, and they worked to support their families, and they were forced, for many of them, to go without an education, and they did not unionize. And now we go into child labor in the mills. This is one of our early pictures, 1910, in a snowstorm in the mills. As early as 1827, the early industrialist and mill designer Samuel Slater, who got his ideas, he actually pilfered his ideas from English mill construction, came to Rhode Island and Massachusetts and created the first mills. And they became a prototype later on for the mills here and in Dover. The factories at Newmarket, there were employed 250 girls, 5 boys, 9 only of the girls are under 15, 6 of whom are 14. And 3 of the boys are under 15, 2 of whom are 14 years old. Children under 15 reside with their parents, this is Slater again, or guardians in the village. And they were admitted into the factories on account of the particular circumstances of the family. They were allowed to work only 6 months in the year. During the other 6 months, they attend a public school in the village. However, what looked good in print for the board of directors seeking new investors was not always the case in reality. And here we have Dr. Jule's widow's account, and this was in the Advertiser. Dr. Jule in 1839 set up his medical practice in town. He died at age 36, leaving a widow and 2 young boys. His wife opened a boarding house for young factory girls, and that was one of the things that was respectable for widows to do, is open up a boarding house for factory girls. And many times the factories would supplement the income, or they would pay the widow directly for the upkeep and the care of these girls. And this model continued for almost 100 years, and then that all switched later on with the Irish and the French immigration. Her oldest son, Bradbury, was 9 years old. He worked in the cotton mill from 4:45 in the morning until 7:30 at night, 16 cents a day, or $1 a week. He worked 9 months and attended school 3 months, not the 6 months that Slater's telling everybody, 3 months. And every year until he was nearly 13, when his health deteriorated and his mother removed him from the factory. And in today's prices, $1 in 1843 is only $32 in today's money. So even back then, the children were not paid as much as adults. By 1845, there were 132,000 men and women working in the Northeast, all of the Northeast textile mills. And that included children under 16 who comprised 40% of the workforce. By 1900, and again, there was a social movement going on by this point for kids to get out of the workforce and to be educated. That percentage dropped to 18% of all workers who are under the age of 18. The agent to the frog pond went to kill the frogs he was intent. He gave them a dose of red-hot water, for he thought to croak they hadn't oughta. And this was written and left behind in 1837 in the Dover mills by women protesting their hours, their pay, and the conditions of employment for themselves, and especially for children in 1837. And they did everything they could to stop strikes. Of course, the mill agents did. The Bobbin boys and girls. This is taken from the Newmarket mills. By hiring small children as the bobbin boys and girls, the company had a piece of the workforce could fit into tiny places, because what they're doing here is making felt. And the children would sweep up the lint, use the lint again in the felt making process, so nothing was really wasted. And that's what one of their tasks was. And just a picture of some of the young boys collecting the lint throughout the factory. This is a success story of a bobbin boy. Started working the mills at age 6. Retired after 23 years as manager of the Newmarket Manufacturing Company. He started in Providence, worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Only 6 months of schooling in his entire life, however, he was self-motivated. And he went on to higher positions in the company, known for honesty, charity, friendliness. When he retired, the company had switched from a lot of cotton to silk. And silk then became the dresses and the shirts of the wealthier people along the eastern seaboard. So under his watch, they switched from cotton to manufacturing a lot of silk. When they realized what was happening in the South, it was easier and cheaper for the companies to keep the manufacture of cotton goods where they actually pick the cotton, rather than transporting up here. We are very lucky that we have some photographs documenting these kids. This is the photograph right over here. And you notice that the boys are barefoot for the most part. They look like they might be wearing stockings, but you don't know if it's dirt or just stockings. They're shown in the foreground because they could climb the looms to untangle the threads. This was a bobbin boy who hated it. And he became a store clerk and then a POW during the Civil War. He became a successful merchant in state legislature. And Durrell attended Newmarket schools, then he left and became the bobbin boy. During the Civil War, 45 men on patrol, captured, taken to Fort Libby, which was one of the worst POW camps in the Civil War, and he was one of only 5 of the 45 who survived. And on the return, he worked for B.F. Haley. Then he served in many town offices and representative to the state legislature. The Newmarket census from the 1860s through the 1910s, entire Irish families, including children as young as 12, were working in the cotton mills. And most of these children were first-generation Americans born in either Newmarket or elsewhere in New Hampshire or Massachusetts. Following the Irish came the French Canadians. This was a bobbin boy who came to Newmarket when his father died. He was 11 when he went into the mills, 11 years old. At age 17, he left Newmarket, went to Lowell, and then he returned to Newmarket. He had moved himself up in the company, and he was respected, joined several social organizations in town. In 1907, he was the first French Canadian elected as a Newmarket town selectman. Young girls working in the factories. Quite different from when they were on the farm. At the house, there were a variety of things you had to do. You had to churn butter, you had to milk cows, you had to sew, you had to cook, you had to clean, you had to iron. But in the factories, you were on your feet, often 15 or more hours, in hot, dim room, loud. If any of you have been to the museum in Lowell, they have the recording of what it actually sounded like with the looms going. It was deafening. It was deafening. This is from the Factory's Girl, Garland, in 1884, which was printed in Exeter. While factory children, day by day, weave with cloth their lives away, while rich employers dividend seek, coin from the blood of the poor and weak, and the heartless rulers refuse to yield the asked-for 10-hour shield. The women were asking for a 10-hour work week, not the 14, not the 12, a 10-hour work week is what they were being. Work day. Did I say week?
Yes.
Sorry. Work day. The 10-hour work day. And you can see this was published in Exeter. Newmarket had its own Factory Girl. And oftentimes what would happen if it was published in Exeter, it would have been published in Newmarket and Dover and in Lowell and all over. Those texts all kind of made the rounds. There is consumed on average in Newmarket over 500 pounds of snuff a month, mostly by females. And one of the working mill ladies is said to leave an order regularly for 4 pounds on or the first of each month from the Newmarket Advertiser. And that was in 1876. Newmarket had the highest snuff consumption in the state. And you ask yourself, well, why? Why so much snuff, especially by women? And this is a clip from a film done in 2004 in England, and you have a sense of what it was like in the cotton mill with all those fibers, and by putting snuff up your nostrils, you continually were cleaning out your nose. Miss Ora M. Wentworth died age 23, 1884 of consumption at age 17. At the time of her death, she was a weaver in the mills. Remember, in the mills, you get all that stuff floating around, and consumption involved the lungs, wasting of the body. It was called like the White Plague. And Jenny May's mother died of consumption also. It was kind of an over-encompassing term for these deaths in the mill. And we'll briefly go into a few of the accidents in the Newmarket mills that we have documented. Dangers on the job. A couple of boys in the mills, this we're dealing with the Newmarket mills. Michael Flanagan, age 12, good Irish name, got his hand caught in the doubler, machine used in the card room, which stripped the skin and muscle from the wrist to the finger ends, but broke no bones. Soon afterwards, another boy named George Lantuna put his hand into the same machine and came off worse. 2 of his fingers had to be amputated. Death on the docks. In the late 1800s, a young Edgley boy, we don't know his name yet. I'm still trying to find out his name, but Edgley is an old Newmarket name, family name. Unloading supplies from a boat in the river. When the boat swayed, he lost his footing, fell between the boat and the dock. The boat swayed back and crushed him between the hull and the rocks. In 1893, we had a fatal accident. Henry Towell, 17. What he did is he was supposed to get cloth off the elevator. Well, they had pulleys in the elevator, and he used to pull himself up and jump just before the doors closed. He didn't quite make it, and he got crushed in the elevator doors. In 1914, a 15-year-old boy fell down the elevator shaft to his death. This is a sad story. He was killed in mill number 4. Mill number 4 is where the old Sam Smith is now where the joinery and all the apartments are, where the mill space is. He fell down the elevator well, 4 stories, striking his head, fracturing his skull. He was unconscious when picked up and died in almost 30 minutes. He had just heard of the death of his mother at the State Hospital in Concord, was hurrying out of the mill to join his sister, who was going to Concord to bring back their mother's body. The family had been unfortunate, as his father dropped dead a few weeks ago while working in a sawmill, and the brother also died recently. The victim of the accident was 15 and came from Dover to work in the mills last August. And we go from mill yard to schoolyard. Again, we are so lucky in town because we have some photos from the mill workers that were done at the turn of the century or a little bit before the turn of the century. This shows children in the mill. And the feeling that might have been some of the overseers of the children because they're separate from where a lot of the adults are. And when you do a blow up of these kids' faces, you see how young they look. What I particularly like about this photograph is that this kid has got attitude. You can tell. As does this kid. He's got attitude, and his friends were peering out the window up in the corner. And we know it's from the mills here in town. This little girl we see later on in other photographs from the Newmarket mills. The school attendance bill was passed in 1901 by the New Hampshire legislature, which gave the school districts, truant officers, authority to take the kids out of the mills and put them in the seats. Take them from the farm and put them in the seats. In 1900, students who should be in school were 734. Actually in school is the 444, and where the hell's the other 290? Don't know. 1901, school is very efficient. We're supposed to have 767. We have 767 according to the town reports. And this is what we had for school membership. This is in September of 1300, with 290 missing. Labor certificates were issued by the superintendent of school, this is all part of the same bill, between the ages of 14 and 16 to work in the mill. Here's the same little girl again. The superintendent publicly thanked the Newmarket Manufacturing Company who facilitated the enforcement of the law and cooperated fully with the school superintendent's office. By the end of 1901, 81 certificates were issued. So there are 81 kids under 16. There were 81 certificates issued who were actually working in the mills. All children under 16 not holding a certificate would be forcibly put in school. And this little graph shows how many working certificates we have. And we kind of see until 1907, it jumped considerably or downward from the 81. And look at the number of those who could not read or write English. And when you look at the asterisks that I put it, I placed in the town school reports, 27 born in New Hampshire, 62 in a foreign country, 54 born in a foreign country in 05 and 07, 26 born, 39 born in a foreign country. You can see the influx coming in from immigration. Children in school in 1908, out of a total of 413 ages 5 through 18, 27 students over the age of 16, that's all out of 413. Only 10 had perfect attendance and only 7 graduated from high school. But you have to remember back then, especially with the Irish and the French Canadians, and with the old English too, stock, once you graduated from the 8th grade, the family's considered you done. Now you're going to go to work. So a lot of kids did not continue on after the 8th grade. And with the demise of child labor, the new development in factory systems, some areas was the decreasing reliance on child labor because of heavier, more difficult machinery. As the industry was evolving, they didn't really need as many children as they had at the beginning of the industry. Also, Lewis Hines did a whole photographic series of children working in the mills, which went countrywide and fueled a lot of social disapproval with the use of child labor. These are all photos in New Hampshire. What he used to do is actually go into some of the mills and he would stage the photograph. So they weren't candids, they were staged. In 1911, under the child labor law, you could be employed at age 16. New limitations for children under 16 could work in retail, but they couldn't work more than 11 hours in any one day, and they could not work past 7 p.m., and girls under 18 could not work past 10 p.m. And during the Great Depression, the changes in political attitudes in the United States and child labor reforms benefited. And much later on, in 1838, with the Fair Labor Standards Act, there was a national minimum wage and maximum hour standards for workers in interstate commerce. So that involved Newmarket mills in interstate commerce, and placed limitations on child labor. So in effect, the employment of children under 16 of age was prohibited in manufacturing and mining. But with the closure of the Newmarket mills at the beginning of the Great Depression, that more or less ended the town's labor conflicts with child labor. During the Depression, and especially at the start of World War II, many young men in 1941 left high school before graduation and they enlisted in the war effort. And here's some of the men who left age 17 to join the service in World War II. And these two left in their junior year, and these two were killed in action. Private Francis Murphy and Corporal Raymond Bisson. These are Newmarket men, now retired with distinguished military and government careers. These are all Vietnam veterans. Larry Smith, who enlisted at age 17. The day he graduated from high school, he packed his bags and left. His stepmother refused and his father refused to allow him to join the service, so he went to Massachusetts, found his birth mother, had her sign a waiver so he could join at 17. Lemuel Branch enlisted very young with the objections of his mother, but his father allowed him to enlist. He since has gone on. He has recently retired. He's been in ever since the 70s, just retired a couple of years ago. He's been in a variety of conflicts. And of course, Alan Knight, who left home and went right into the Marines. And nobody thought little Alan would be in the Marines, but little Alan showed his mettle. They actually would put him upside down in foxholes in Vietnam. And Alan has a fun story because when he was a young kid in Newmarket, he went to the community church. Dr. Tennant was one of the deacons of the church, and Dr. Tennant also worked at Sam Smith's shoe shop. And at that point, they were looking for models for kids, so every once in a while, they'd pick up a cute-looking kid. They picked Alan, put him in some Sam Smith shoes, took photographs of him, and his pictures was advertising throughout the country. And he got free shoes for it. No pay, but free shoes. Over the years, many Newmarket youth left town and made successful careers in military right out of high school. Paul Valier, is so distant a relation to Paul Revere that it's not worth going into. But Paul Valier, a young boy living on Cedar Street in the 50s, became a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force. Sometimes it's a family affair, father and sons. And David here was in Newmarket High as a junior when he joined the National Guards, New Hampshire National Guards. He since served overseas in Afghanistan. Youth groups grew in town after 1950. There were always a few prior to the 40s. We had always church groups, youth groups. We always had groups associated with different organizations like the Redmen, the Polish Club, the CYO, from different organizations. Boy Scouts in 1941 assisted the home front during wartime. They would go around during blackouts, making sure your shades were down. The Sea Scouts around World War I assisted the local police department in patrolling at night and giving out tickets and that sort of thing. 4-H clubs in the boys. I haven't found anything about girl 4-H during World War II, but they collected medals in part of the campaigns, and they were instrumental in getting a lot of junk recycled for the war effort. There were always school and event programs and youth organizations. However, after 1950, it really grew. There are so many more youth organizations in town, a variety of baseball, sports leagues, musters, rec centers, movies that were shown at the Old Star Theater. The Boy Scouts had Explorer Post in 1966 for the first time. 4-H for girls I found in 1950. A variety of things going on for kids. And when you ask why the change, a lot of this stemmed from children themselves as investigative reporters. And when I say children, I'm talking about high school kids. And here we have the activists of 1949. They sought out the Union leader, and they did a huge story on Children's Crusade Seeks to Bring Back Newmarket. It was a multi-page feature of which we have some pictures here, but if you take a look at this, be very careful because it's very brittle and the newspaper is falling apart. It did not show the town in a good light, and it created a storm of controversy with people writing letters to the editor saying, you showed us in the worst possible light, we're doing this, we're doing that. But what was interesting is that these students which was Lillian Barker, Dorothy Shiner, Robert Critchett, and Louise Munchin. And they don't mention who the boy is. And if anybody knows who the boy is, please let me know. I don't know who that gentleman is up in that corner. Were instrumental in generating this publicity needed for their cause. And a few months later, after this came to light, I mean, some of the members who were on different committees resigned in protest of this publicity and all of that. The town created a joint committee between the rec and the planning departments and honored Miss Munchin by choosing her as their secretary. And these are some of the pictures that the union leader ran. And you may remember these pictures of cars parked alongside the mills. That old weave shed, which is now the parking lot, and Weaver's Row, was just a jumble of bricks still in 1949. And there was a picture of Mary Moonshine at the old dump, which is now the senior center.
Yeah.
So it really arrowed in on Newmarket's poverty and the problems that the town had with no recreation for kids. And this was the old weave shed with just bricks and piles pulling out of itself. And the water tower came down in '77. But after this whole controversy in '53, the Newmarket Industrial Association began a campaign to clean up and refence the property. And this remained as the eyesore of Main Street for years until they started really cleaning it up. And from, I think, their activism in '49, and we had a lot of, at that time, the selectmen at the town were, let's say, the older generation who didn't want to spend the money on the tax base, keep all the taxes down. However, then a lot of the guys from World War II became interested in town politics, town affairs, knowing what was needed for kids. They started taking over, and they started other ways of getting the community involved and sprucing up, cleaning, and creating more opportunities for youth. And that's part of the revitalization with a pride in place. And we see this area here before the Star Theater came down. Now it's where the post office is, and today looking up Main Street. Quite a bit of difference. And education changes the focus. We had new daycare groups started. This is the old Winnie the Pooh Nursery School that came about in the '70s. Then the new school, which was built in, when was the new school built?
The new school.
I say the new school, the elementary
The
school.
elementary school, 1986, 7? Yeah.
And Governor Shaheen broke ground in 1998 in town for 3 new kindergarten classrooms attached to the new school. Children as investigative reporters in the 80s and 1990s. We had the old Grant School dig up on Grant Road. Then we had a group that got together and did for a class, historical interviews. And they wrote these stories by interviewing old people. I don't say old, I won't say old. They're old Newmarket people, let's say. Roy Kent, Tony Mallet, Doc and Sylvia Getchels, Norma Szabo, Irene Levesque, the Mitchells, Fred Hockerow, Laura Sewell, and they came up with stories as told to them, and they took photographs as told to them and given to them, and they compiled it in a book, which I put up in different locations on the website dealing with bios. And one of these stories deals with the old Sawyer house. The Sawyer family had been part of the community for the 1700s, and their story in the interviews was fishy facts. It was told by Junior Sawyer and described the fishing industry over the past several decades. And which is interesting, another young investigator is Alice Lulu Watson, who was the aunt of Junior Sawyer and lived on now New Road. She attended Newmarket schools as a lifelong resident of town. We have her map that she did in 1904, when she was 13, which is really fascinating. It was a school project where she did a map of Newmarket downtown with little numbers on it. It is really tiny little writing, and you flip it over, and she has what the stores were and who was living in these houses in 1904. So she was one of our first map makers in town. Students in the sciences, the Great Bay Watch program, it started in 1990 with volunteers from 19 communities. Newmarket site is number 19, and it's under the direction of Jim Fabiano and his Newmarket High School students. And in 1993, high chloroform counts were reported for Newmarket's Moonlight Brook, and the students' efforts were successful in getting the town and state to act on this information in a timely manner. And the discovery was widely reported at the time. And these students went on to interview other schools and talk to other science departments and get other schools involved with creating Great Bay Watch programs around the area. Yeah, down by the brook. Also, history, which is passed on in appreciation within the family. Nellie Anderson, when 6 years old, discovered this Civil War medal while swinging in her backyard on Packers Falls Road. And she learned that the property was once an orchard, and she felt that this medal must have belonged to a Civil War veteran. She donated the medal to the museum in memory of her son Kenny, who died recently. He was an avid Civil War enthusiast. And he attended Newmarket High and was active in community church and Boy Scouts and hand tub. Eagle Scouts projects, which are ongoing. Brent Bergeron in 2013 created walking trails on the Follett Brook. Brian Milliken provided a place for the community church to host picnics for their annual rally day, an event for other events, which is behind the thrift shop going down on the river. Projects at Riverside Cemetery, they benefit the Memorial Day ceremonies. James Rosa built this as a Boy Scout project in 1909, still there, still standing, still solid. And the mapping of veterans' graves by Spencer Gurley last year and this year, it's going to assist the Legion in their annual Memorial Day flagging, which they flag all the stones in Riverside. And many of these guys don't have plaques and they don't have notations, so he's gone through the veterans database as well as the Kenton Pelzer Cemetery records, and is melding those together, which will make things go a lot faster, because otherwise you look at every grave and then people follow up behind who didn't get flagged. Linked together, it's a group of young girls, 2nd through the 6th grade, and they choose a project. They give it to the superintendent of schools and they do it on their own. And last year the group created more than 1,000 pairs of jeans to donate to the homeless youth across the country. This year they've collected hundreds of letters and they sent them to Newmarket servicemen serving overseas. And this is a picture of them last year, collecting their jeans. The Newmarket Community Garden celebrated their 10th anniversary this month, and they have projects for children which are ongoing, plant walks, birdhouse building, painting parties, sheep mulching, beekeeping. These are all things that the children are involved with the community gardens. And this is a youth marching forward. We had, just before, when we were setting up for our 50th anniversary, a young fellow came in and found this key behind the fire station, the old fire station. This gentleman had been in one of the classes that I think it was the 4th grade, 4th or 5th grade, the following year that had come here and we did a presentation. And I had him lift the old crowbar and different things upstairs. And he found this and he thought we might want it. So he brought this rusted old skeleton key he found in the crevices behind the old fire station to us. So when the youth know we're here, we have hope for the future of the town and the future of the youth and what the things that they can accomplish. And especially when I look at this particular piece of artwork, which is done by a young girl, actually going to be my niece. She's going to be 4.
Is your niece.
She is my niece. Did I say she's going to be my niece? She is my niece. She's going to be 4 pretty soon. And she overheard her mother talking about the road race. And so she drew this thing about the women in the road race.
Oh. She did a good job.
She did a good job for a 3-year-old. And that concludes our presentation for children in Newmarket, through the eyes of Newmarket.
Yeah, very nice. Now, when you were speaking of the Langleys, because that was my mother's maiden name.
Oh,
Yeah.
John Langley. This was John Langley who died in.
Well, that I couldn't tell you, but see, they originally from down Durham Point or somewhere, a Langley family.
Yeah,
There might be a connection.
there might be a connection. Sophie, her maiden name was Tuttle. Sophie Tuttle Langley. And I think there's a connection maybe with Bert Langley. And Bert Langley was he was a military man. Again, I didn't mention Bert, but Bert left. This was before World War I, and he joined the Navy. And he was in the Navy for his whole year. We got a picture of Bert. I think that picture's upstairs somewhere of Bert. He was Navy man, Korean man in World War I as well. He never married, and he lived on North Main Street. But Langley, which is sad, the daughter died, and Sophia didn't have it easy. She didn't have it easy. She moved. She had three or four children. Clara, is that Clara Langley? Familiar?
No,
No?
I didn't know any of them. We didn't visit.
Okay.
I guess.
But they left from Newmarket because at that time when the mills were going down, there was a recession, they would go to Lawrence or Lowell, wherever there was work. And they left Newmarket at one point, went to Lawrence. That's where Annie met her husband, John Lowe. He was 10 years older. He's the one who died of a heart attack as well. But that was in Lawrence. And then they came back to Newmarket where she died.
Now, see, my grandmother was a Haynes and married the Langley, which was my mother's parents. So I was related to Ralph Haynes.
Okay.
When did the actual weaving room close in Newmarket?
The weaving room here?
The one that, where the parking lot is, J-Bed.
They kind of closed and bolted before the war. It was just at the beginning of the Depression. Again, this is one of the stories that's a whole program in itself, whether it was a strike or a lockout. Some women left in complaint of working conditions. They locked the doors behind them. At that point, the manufacturing company saw the writing on the wall during the Depression. And by, what's the slide say, that was what, 29, something like that, everybody was more or less locked out. There were other weaving that came back after that. But what they were doing is they started to remove the windows, and they were removing anything they could and moving it down to Massachusetts until the town got an injunction to stop them.
Yeah.
Then it was demolished for the war effort during World War II. All the metal went to the war effort because those were all, we have the picture up on the wall of the windows and with all the metal framing and all that. That was all recycled for the military effort. But that was all done before World War II.
Now, when they came out with the Newmarket paper, what was the name of it?
The first one?
Well, it was back, the little one there, it was back in the 40s. And they called
Newmarket
it
News?
the Newmarket Great Bay or
Oh, the
something.
Great Bay Pilot. Great Bay
Okay,
Pilot.
well, my boyfriend at the time was my husband after, but we were going around and getting prescriptions for the paper. And so I ended up with my picture in the paper as being Miss Great Bay.
Oh, what year was that?
It had to be 46, 1946.
We have a collection. I don't think I go back to 46. Every Great Bay Pilot I have is up on the web. I put them all up on the web. and I'm trying to remember the year. I know it was during the war
Don't look at me.
because
I don't know.
Well, I
it
knew
was,
it had to be in 46 because I was going out with him at that time.
are you wearing a tiara?
Yeah.
What was her name? Her maiden name was Bentley, Mary Bentley.
Yeah.
She was a school from Newmarket High School. She was the correspondent to the Great Bay.
See, she and I was in the same, we graduated together.
You did. She saved those. Everything that she wrote, she saved. And she had a sister.
Evelyn.
No, there was another sister, Mary.
Sydney.
Sydney. Sydney gave them to the library. And the library asked if we wanted them. I said, by all means, bring them up here. And actually, let me find the year, because I might just have a picture of you in a tiara. Were you wearing a bathing suit?
No, I had on my suit.
So did you get married during the war, or was after
No,
the
I got
war?
married in
In
47.
47.
You don't happen to have your wedding gown still?
No, I didn't have a wedding gown.
Did you have a
Well,
suit?
Did you have a suit? A lot of women. I'm doing the wedding exhibit, which we're going to have.
No, I just had a regular dress, something I could wear after.
After exactly.
And you know, silly me, I should have worn my senior gown that I had for my prom because that was white and never even thought about it.
Right. But I mean, at the time of the war, many women wore a dress or suit that they would
Well,
wear
suit,
again.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Mhm.
No.
So we're having a hard time trying to find anything
Well, I
wedding
don't
related
have
from
that
that
anymore
period.
either, it's been a long time.
Yeah.
Okay, now I've got 3 young women are leading for the Miss Great Bay honor. The award will be made Halloween night. Now that doesn't sound good.
Halloween night.
At the party, the civics department. These are Bertrice Dennett,
Yeah,
Madeline Ramsdell, and Marjorie Hall. Hall or Hale? It doesn't look, it's either a typo or a comma.
it's
after
Marjorie
the-
Hale. It's Marjorie Hale.
So there you are.
That's me right there.
And you won.
Yeah,
So,
we sold the most. Most churches, that's.
so what date is this? See if I've got the following week. That is
October 25th, 1944.
So when we're
That's
looking
we'll look for the
November,
Oh,
early
okay.
November,
Well, if
November
that's there,
46.
then it probably is,
March, April.
because I got a great big, my graduation picture is what they took.
But all of these photos are up on the web. I mean, all those
Look at the
newspapers.
patterns.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
Also, what happened in Lee, the Lee Library got a grant because their microfilm machine was not working. A grant to put all the Newmarket advertisers up. So they start from 1896, I think, or 1893, up to 1930-something, I think, is what their collection was. And that's where I found the obit of Jenny May.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, we found it.
You found it. There you are. Get a picture of this? Here we have Miss Great Bay.
Yeah,
Oh,
well,
come on, hold your picture.
oh God. What a difference.
1946.
Halloween.
Oh, that's neat.
Very nice, Bert.
Say, you don't have to be dead to be in the Historical Society
No.
archives.
Well, I hope you find my first grade picture.
Well, don't give up on me. Don't give up on me. I'm still
It should
looking.
be at your house.
I'm sure it is.
Oh, please.
You were gonna copy it, and then the names and stuff, so I'd like it back.
We'll get it back. We'll get it back.
Oh, that's funny.
Anything else?
No, I think I gave you all the information I
And more so. Thank you.
See, you didn't realize that my parents were Langley and
Well,
Hayes.
you want me to? I can blow this up and make sure you get a copy of it.
I have one of those, thank you.
Oh, you do. Okay.
Yes.
Is it framed?
No, it's in my album.
Oh. Well,
And
thank
of course, my graduation picture sits on my bureau anyway.
That's nice.
Well, thank you ladies for showing up.
Well,
Thank
yeah.
you.